Welcome everybody. My name is Barry Frazier. I am the the general manager for the Bay Ricks Authority in the San Francisco Bay Area. And this is a discussion, a panel session on new tools for public safety in the broadband world. And we have some very distinguished and smart people here to talk about these types of things. And I'm the moderator, and I'll introduce Bill and Richard as later on as they do their presentations. I wanted to just make a couple of initial announcements. Please turn off or silence your cell phones so you're not ringing in the middle of the presentation. All of these presentation PowerPoints will be available to conference attendees after the conference, so you'll be able to go back and get those. The last thing I have to tell you is we had originally had 3 people speaking on this panel. Captain Chris Lombard with the Seattle Fire Department is unable to attend today because he was actually deployed first to Houston and straight from Houston over to Florida for the recovery for the hurricanes that they've had down there. And I know we've all probably got people who we know who live there or who have been sent there or who've been impacted by those storms. And I just want to wish Chris safety and good luck on his work down there and thank him for his service. We all depend on our first responders, but never more so than when a disaster like a hurricane hits. So we appreciate you being there, Chris, and taking care of things. So in Chris's absence, we're going to basically stick to the program pretty much and make a couple of adjustments. I am going to talk first and foremost about the NATOA's public safety activities. It's not a primary focus perhaps of the organization, but we do some important work related to public safety for this organization. The first thing that we do is we have a committee, the Public Safety Homeland Security Technology Committee, which meets every the second Monday of each month by conference call. And you're all welcome to join that committee. Anyone who's a NATOA member can be on the committee. So if you have an interest in public safety, we talk about many of the same issues we'll be talking about here today. I would encourage you to join the committee and participate on the phone calls. We also have representatives to 2 national associations that deal with public safety issues. The first is SAFECOM. SAFECOM is an organization under the Department of Homeland Security, and there's a group of member associations, a collective of 40 or so agencies, associations, national associations that have members on the SAFECOM member associations group. There is actually a handout that SAFECOM sent that is on the back table back there, so please grab one of those handouts that gives some information about SAFECOM and what they do. NATOA member Andrew Afflerbach is the representative from NATOA to SAFECOM, and Andrew couldn't be here today, but he's very active in that organization, and he gives regular reports back to our committee on our second Monday phone calls. The second thing that we're involved in is the FirstNet Public Safety Advisory Committee, the PSAC. I'm the representative from NATOA to the PSAC. Again, it's a group of about 40 to 45 association representatives, national associations, and we support FirstNet in a variety of different tasks. We have done task teams on quality of service, priority and preemption, site hardening, public safety grade sites and infrastructure, which we may talk a little bit about later today, security and user roles and responsibilities. And this last year we spent some time, a task team was developed for the topic of preparing for adoption of FirstNet. I'm going to mention this and talk very briefly about it. In June of 2017, this task team issued a report, two pieces to this report. First was a list of what were called network differentiators for the FirstNet network. And these are things that will distinguish the FirstNet network from standard public safety, or I'm sorry, standard commercial grade networks. And then the second piece was a preparing for adoption agency checklist, which is, I think, a very valuable checklist for local agencies, and I'll tell you how to get a copy of that in just a minute. The priority, or the network differentiators, that's a very difficult word to say. Network differentiators, I've listed here. The report itself goes into more detail, but there are things like priority and preemption, making sure that first responders get on the network when they need to and get the highest priority when they're on the network. Identity, credentialing, and access management, which deals with security and making sure that the users are actually authorized to use the system. Quality of service, which ensures that they get the best quality connection when they need it. Reliability, security, public safety app store, which will differentiate, I think, the FirstNet network from other commercial grade networks, and increase coverage in rural and urban areas. The other piece of this report was the preparing for adoption agency checklist. I have the list of things here. I'm not going to go into them. It's not something that really fits well on a PowerPoint slide, but there are things like reviewing agency policy and procedures, possible staffing requirements, applications, devices, possible training needs for agencies, data management policies, and interagency relationships, which is something that I work with specifically in the Bay Area in terms of making sure that the various agencies will work together and cooperate when they're utilizing public safety networks. Procurement issues, funding and budgeting issues, and inventory and testing. These are all very important things that agencies need to be thinking about as they begin to make the decision on whether or not to adopt FirstNet. And I don't have that report here today, but I will be happy to send you a copy of it. There's my email address. We also have, I've worked with the law firm Best & Krieger, who most of you are familiar with. We've developed a separate checklist for local governments. I have a few copies of that here. I'll be happy to send that one to you as well. There are a lot of similarities with the PSAC checklist. There are a few differences, but we can get you a copy of that as well. And finally, before I turn this over to our two panelists, there are a couple of VIPs in the audience that I wanted to introduce. The first is a man named Barry Luke, who is the Deputy Director of an organization called the National Public Safety Telecommunications Council, NIPSTIC. And Barry is a Seattle resident and native, and I invited him to come here today. I work with Barry on a variety of different working groups. NIPSTIC is involved in a lot of heavy lifting on technical research and related to public safety communications. Barry is an outstanding leader of the group, and I appreciate it. He's also a good friend, and I thank you for being here today. I hope you have some questions for us. The other VIP I have is Mel Meyer, who is with Oakland County, Michigan, law enforcement. Mel is a fellow member on the PSAC with me and has actually recently been named to the PSAC's executive committee, which is a group of, I guess, 5 people who actually run the entire PSAC. And Mel, very happy to have you here, and I hope you have some questions for us too. Feel free to introduce yourselves to both of those folks after the session, and thank you for being here. So we'll get started with our first speaker, who is Bill Schreier. Many of you know Bill. He's spoken here before. He's been a good friend of NATOA over the years. And Bill currently leads FirstNet work on, he's the FirstNet senior advisor. He currently leads FirstNet work on smart and safe communities, Internet of Things, and engagement with organizations, first responder organizations like International Association of Fire Chiefs, major county sheriffs, and major city police chiefs. His previous experience includes serving as a Chief Information Officer for the Seattle Police Department, Senior Policy Advisor in the State of Washington's Office of the Chief Information Officer, and as a Chief Technology Officer for the City of Seattle. He's also served as Washington State Point of Contact for FirstNet, and he's He's done a lot of things, and he's also a very good friend that I've worked with many times over the years. And so, Bill, I will invite you up to talk a little bit about what you're doing.
Thank you, Barry. So I have to live up to all that billing now.
That's right.
We will see. So I'm going to talk about smart communities and FirstNet, what FirstNet means for smart communities. And I've got two main points today. The first one is that FirstNet is imminent. It will be here within weeks. And the second one is that I believe FirstNet and smart communities, and I call it smart communities rather than smart cities because towns and villages and rural areas are smart as well, are intimately linked to FirstNet through what we're calling the Internet of Life-Saving Things. So Barry already went through this introduction. There's a couple of things he did not say about me, which will be on this slide. Besides having all those positions, I'm an aspiring millennial. I've had 5 jobs in 5 years. That's what millennials do, right? They change jobs every year. I just joined FirstNet last August after that year as the Chief Information Officer interim for Seattle Police. I'm also a Seattle Seahawks fan. That'll come up a little bit later in the presentation. And I'm a proud resident of the least stressful, least racist city in America. And if you don't believe me, just do a search online. Some company surveyed cities around the world, and Seattle came in number 12 for least stressful and least racist, which was the top rating in the United States. And I don't know how they got to that particular conclusion. Like Barry did, I'm going to call out or give shout outs to a couple of people. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Tony Perez, who you all know from the Office of Cable Communications here in Seattle, and Brenda Tate, who works with Tony in that work. I've worked with Tony for years. He's done just yeoman's work, great work here in Seattle, as you all know, on cable communications. Also want to give a shout out or acknowledgement to Jeanette Kennedy. Jeanette works in the Government Affairs Office of FirstNet, and Jeanette works extensively with governors, legislators in several states around the United States, including the state of Washington and the state of California. My last shout out is to Brenda Cooper, who's in the front row here. She's the Chief Information Officer for the city of Kirkland and has been involved with NATOA and other efforts like this. Broadband specifically, fiber broadband builds in suburban Seattle for a number of years. Okay. Now's when you look up from your smartphones and your tablet computers, and maybe you can't read this. It says, the paramedic is treating this woman who's dead on the street. She's dead, probably from a massive stroke the moment she realized she had left her home without her phone. We all depend on these things, right? We all depend on these devices. But yet in many cases, we don't give them to our first responders. We don't give them to cops and firefighters and paramedics. Or if we do, we put a device in their police vehicle or their fire apparatus. So this gets me to my first point. FirstNet is imminent. It will be a reality within weeks. So I'm just going to go through a quick, what is FirstNet? How many people here would say they have a decent understanding of what FirstNet is? Okay, so most of the room, so we'll flash through this pretty quickly. There have been some new developments. This is an exciting time in public safety. Here are some of the things that have happened in public safety. The first land mobile radio in a police vehicle, Victoria, Australia, and here in Seattle, or here in the United States, it was Detroit, Michigan. Public safety handheld radios. I was a cop back in the 1970s. I remember the first couple of years I worked, I did not have a handheld radio. I got out of my car and I depended on the charity of citizens and their landline phones if I got in trouble. And then mobile data terminals in the 1990s where you could actually get data in a police vehicle. Here's why this is an exciting time. With smartphones and iPhones and tablets, this sort of data for first responders and actually all other kinds of responders is now potentially available in their hands. Public safety challenges. I won't go through these with the exception of one. On the upper left, we all know about 9/11 in 2001. We marked the anniversary of 9/11 earlier this week. Great tragedy in the United States. and the commission report saw that there was a lack of interoperable communications between NYPD and the New York Fire Department, and recommended a nationwide network of interoperable communications, which led to FirstNet. We've also lost, here's 17 hotshot firefighters in Arizona, all killed in a single incident because the wind shifted, and they didn't know that the wind had shifted, blew right over them. There was no communications where they were at. So, this is FirstNet. Well, actually, it's a slide that explains FirstNet. First Responder Network Authority. We're part of the Federal Department of Commerce. I sometimes joke that I work for Donald Trump. 17 levels away. It's created by Congress in 2012 as a result of the 9/11 Commission report. It was funded with $7 billion from the sale of spectrum. Does not involve taxpayer dollars. It's sale of spectrum. It has 700 megahertz spectrum nationwide, all 56 states and territories. FirstNet issued an RFP seeking a private partner in January 2016. It will use commercial LTE technology, a non-proprietary technology, and FirstNet must produce a plan for each one of 56 states and territories. So why do we need a FirstNet? We have AT&T, we've got T-Mobile, we've got Verizon, we've got many carriers. Why do we need a FirstNet? Don't public safety agencies have land mobile radio networks and communications today? And the answer is, of course, they do. They've got such networks, but they're voice only for the most part. Does anybody recognize this slide? Vatican City, the election of Pope Benedict in 2005. And I call your attention to the lower right corner. Single flip phone. Fast forward, election of Pope Francis in 2013, same vantage point. Vast difference, obviously. The iPhone. There were smartphones before the iPhone, but the iPhone has taken the world, the consumer world, the business world by storm.
Same chimney though, right?
Same chimney? Yeah, same chimney with the white smoke that comes out of it, exactly. So who has priority on cell networks? We're raising 2 of our grandchildren. Is my 7-year-old granddaughter Elizabeth with her iPad, or do first responders? The answer is they have equal priority, for the most part, on today's cellular network. There's no particular priority for first responders unless they pay extra money for a small piece of it. Does anybody recognize this slide? Anybody from Seattle should. Seahawks Victory Parade, 2014, February, downtown Seattle, 300,000 people. Here's the headline in the Seattle Times the day afterwards. Cell use at Seahawks Parade swamped wireless networks. For 4 hours, there was basically, you maybe could get a text message through, you couldn't make phone calls because everybody was trying to upload to Twitter and Facebook. That was also true for cops and firefighters. Luckily, there were land mobile radios in Seattle, so there were no serious incidents, so it didn't affect that particular incident. But again, it was a lack of priority. So FirstNet's a nationwide wireless broadband LTE data network with priority for the nation's first responders. Here's the more recent timeline. In March 2017, as a result of that RFP, we issued a contract to AT&T to build the network. There were at least 2 other bidders, maybe more, besides AT&T. And June 19th, FirstNet and AT&T issued a draft plan for 53 states and territories. On August 4th, we accepted comments from those states and territories on the draft plan. And next week, September 19th, we'll issue a final state plan for 53 states and territories. Then the governor of each state and territory has got 90 days under the law to make a decision whether to opt in or opt out of that state plan. AT&T has promised that right after a governor makes a decision to opt in, AT&T first responder users will have priority on all of AT&T's LTE networks nationwide, day one after a governor opts in. And then in 2018, we'll continue the deployment of FirstNet with applications, functions, features beyond priority and preemption.
Have you worked out the date? What's that date? September 19th is the date of issue. What's the deadline for opting there out then?
So the question is, if the state plan is September 19th, what's the deadline for opting in or out? About December 19th, about December. However, 20 states have already opted in. They didn't even wait for the final state plan. They looked at the draft state plan and said, hey, this is good enough for us, we're in. And they signed letters of commitment. And you can see that they include states like Iowa was one of the first. Virginia was actually number one. Arizona and Michigan had actually issued an RFP seeking alternatives, but they chose FirstNet anyway. Around us, Alaska, Montana, Wyoming, Nevada have already opted in, as well as Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands as territories. Okay. Another chance for you to look up from your smartphones. You notice the guy in the middle here has got a smartphone and the rest of them are zombies? When the zombie apocalypse came, the smartphone turned out to be the perfect cover. Isn't that the truth? You walk down the street in Seattle and people are doing this. I almost got hit once with my BlackBerry walking from the Seattle Municipal Building across to Seattle City Hall. I just stepped off the curb into traffic. Luckily, the guy stopped for me. I did not have the right-of-way. So luckily, I didn't become part of the zombie apocalypse. Okay, point number 2. FirstNet and smart communities, that is smart cities, are intimately linked through what we're calling the Internet of Life-Saving Things. So you know about smart cities. It's called smart cities. Again, I prefer the term smart communities because we've got towns, villages, forests, rural areas that also can be smart. It's the instrumentation of the world, right? The Internet of Things. So we've got smart buildings, we've got smart electrical grids, smart water systems, critical infrastructure can be instrumented. Transit, obviously, is already instrumented and can be more. Connected vehicles will be coming up, intelligent transportation systems, and video everywhere. These things are already connected to a great extent. They're going to be connected even more in the future world by the Internet of Things. A sensor and control network that uses broadband. NATOA is intimately concerned with broadband, fiber broadband. So it uses wired fiber broadband, but also uses wireless networks like LTE, LTEM, which is for machine-to-machine communications. That's narrowband IoT, and even FirstNet. FirstNet might be used to connect part of a smart community. I'll give you just one example here, smart buildings. Many new modern buildings are built this way, but in the future we'll see a lot more of them. Video cameras, the electrical energy, fire alarms, burglar alarms, water, HVAC, occupancy sensors, elevators, the entrance controls, all linked together into a network so the building manager can manage it. What does this mean for first responders? Well, fire, police, paramedics, when authorized by the building manager, these first responders should have access to this stuff. They ought to be able to tell, for example, with an occupancy sensor, are there people still in the building? If a burglar alarm has gone off, where has it gone off if the police are called and have to do a search? The fire department ought to be able to control and manage elevators. We ought to be able to, first responders, again with authority, ought to be able to see the video inside buildings, inside schools, for example, during a school incident. So first responders can be intimately connected to smart buildings when an incident occurs. Drilling down to the Internet of Life-Saving Things, we're going to see the Internet of Things and devices being used to outfit our first responders as well. This is a police officer, or an image of a police officer, who may have augmented reality glasses, may have voice to text, certainly will have a body-worn video, health sensors, smart armor, body-worn video. In fact, the body-worn video of a police officer might be connected to the computer-aided dispatch system, might be connected to the records management system, so a cop can walk around a crime scene, narrate to the body-worn video what she or he is seeing, and that becomes the police report. And then, of course, health monitors as well. Officer pulls out a taser weapon or another weapon. It automatically turns on the body-worn video and alerts dispatch. Same thing with firefighters. Helmet cams for live stream, hazmat sensors and biosensors for the environment that the firefighter is in. Remote speaker and voice to text. Indoor location tracker, big issue for firefighters if you're on the 20th floor of a high-rise. Their vehicles could also be instrumented and even become Wi-Fi hotspots. And then we've got augmented reality, body-worn video, drones. All these things can be connected together, perhaps by FirstNet, probably by FirstNet, into an Internet of life-saving things, and then connected back to a dispatch center. So, the question is about augmented reality. I'm going to hold that question to the end. We've only got one or two more slides here, so it'll be relatively quick. So how does this fit together in a big picture for a smart community? In my mind, right now, the 911 and 311 centers that we have in our cities are the center piece of this. Barry Luke back there, who ran the 911 center for Orlando Fire, can chime in on that. We know that right now you have to call, you have to telephone 911 to get a hold of them. But in the future, with next generation 911, you'll be able to send video, email, images, even in many places now, text or short message service to 911 to request service. And of course, you can do a lot of those things already with 311, for example. The 911 center, in turn, will use FirstNet to actually dispatch responders. And notice I've got first responders here, but I also have utility trucks and transportation that also may be first responders during a disaster or an incident. And FirstNet, they'll have priority. They'll be able to get images, video, as well as voice, although land mobile radio networks won't go away. I talked earlier about the Internet of Things or smart city. Somebody's got to monitor all those things. Somebody's got to be able to accept all those inputs, determine if there's a problem, and dispatch a response. I talked about the Internet of life-saving things, the things that surround first responders that they wear that might be in their vehicles. Somebody has to accept all those inputs and take appropriate action, like sending help. In some cases, 911 may be overloaded, so there's something called an emergency services IP network that connects other PSAPs. So if, for example, Seattle 911 is overloaded, some of the 911 calls can be offloaded to Brenda Cooper's 911 center, which is Norcom in Bellevue. And then we've got a whole bunch of things that are non-service requests, that are information only and other help. We're going to overwhelm our 911 centers and our 311 centers, and I think this is what's going to happen. They're going to become real-time analytics centers. We have real-time crime centers in many cities today, but I think these are real-time analytics centers that take a lot of these inputs, not just for crime, but for smart communities in general, marry them up with databases and analytics software, and get that information out to responders when they need it. So that's the conclusion of my discussion. Again, 2 points. FirstNet is imminent. Governors are opting in already. It's happening today. And FirstNet and smart communities, I think, are intimately linked to the Internet of life-saving things. FirstNet. And I'll answer one question really quickly, and then we'll slew over to Rich. What is augmented reality? Apple's announcement this week, Apple 100% believes in augmented reality, Tim Cook. Essentially, it's I hold up my device, which has a camera. I don't know if you can see my ugly mug in the camera. But overlaid on that video or that camera can be information about what you're seeing. If it's a building, it can be where are the building entrances, or where are the fire standpipes, where are the burglar alarms, and other information about the building. It could also be overlaid with information, like if I've got you and your photograph in my contacts, it could be overlaid with your phone number, for example, so I just tap on your photo to call you. So that's an augmented reality. So Google Glass also is another way of getting augmented reality. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Barry.
And let's please hold all our questions until we, at the end of the presentations, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So our next speaker is Richard Mosley. He's the Director of Public Policy at AT&T. Rich is a longtime telecommunications professional with 33 years experience in the industry. He started in 1984 as a software engineering developer for developing applications for Ericsson's digital switching system. He later developed telecommunications software for NEC America, Northern Telecom, and Bell Northern Research. He joined Bell South Telecommunications in 1991 and continued his career with AT&T when they purchased Bell South in 2008. And for the last 15 years, he's been a legal and regulatory professional specializing in public safety communications. Richard currently also has responsibility for E911, Next Generation 911, and Industrial IoT public policy at AT&T. Rich, thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
You know, it's really great when the people on the panel are on the same page, and you know, everything that Bill just described is absolutely, totally 100%. We are on board with it. We are in total agreement with it. And I told Bill I really like that term, Internet of Life-Saving Things. That's the first time I've heard it, but it's really great. If, with your permission, hopefully I'll use it and source it to you. So.
Not copyrighted.
Okay, great. I first got involved in FirstNet in 2010. I was a member of the team on AT&T that convinced Congress, lobbied Congress, to allocate 700 megahertz spectrum to for public safety, for use by public safety. It was a long battle, an uphill battle, and it's not easy to convince Congress or any government entity to allocate the amount of money that was allocated, $7 billion, to for a project like this. But as you know, it eventually was accomplished in the Middle Class Tax Relief and Creation Act of 2012, which essentially gave birth to FirstNet. So I have to say that I've been in the telecom industry for a little over 30 years, and this is probably the most exciting thing I have seen, certainly in my 30 years, maybe in 50 years in the telecom industry, if you want to exclude the internet. But it's very exciting. It's a wonderful time to be alive in terms of technology. Things are coming together with smartphone technology, with network technologies. It's just, it's enabling all kinds of things. So for the first time really ever, we're going to have federal, state, and local first responders able to talk to each other, communicate with each other over a national interoperable public safety network, utilizing the same spectrum and essentially the same equipment. It's going to be funded, as I said, by a multi-billion-dollar allocation by Congress, and I think we're going to be the envy of the world. I don't think we're going to see anything like this for some time in the rest of the world. I hope that you guys feel like I do, that we're all part of this in some way in helping build this. We're also going to be the recipients of this technology. So, everybody is going to benefit from this. It's really going to be a great thing, and I feel very happy to know that we, in some part, have helped secure the safety of the people in this country going forward. Convergence is the word we're using at AT&T. Convergence is how we're describing what's happening with all these technologies coming together. We see public safety, smart cities, transportation, and even drone technology, unmanned aircraft systems coming together. And these applications and underlying technologies are going to be overlapping and utilizing many of the same things. At the heart of these applications will be 5G technology, which we anticipate deploying in the around 2019, 2020 timeframe, and IoT technologies, which we already have a fairly substantial base of installed IoT sensors, but it's going to be just exploding in the next few years into all kinds of different applications. We're going to have dedicated 700 megahertz spectrum for public safety first responders, and we're going to have existing commercial spectrum. First responders will be able to ruthlessly preempt, and that is the actual term, ruthlessly preempt commercial spectrum on AT&T's network in times of critical emergencies for their needs for emergency traffic. At the nexus of these applications lies a number of critical infrastructure sectors that are all supported by these IoT technologies. They're going to encompass emergency services, communications, transportation, energy, water, information technology, commercial, government facilities, all kinds of things. Literally every aspect of your life will be impacted by these technologies. Infrastructure development will utilize intelligent transportation systems over broadband networks. Roads, bridges, public transit will be monitored and largely controlled by digital networks in the future. There won't be an aspect of your life that's not monitored or to some level controlled in some way, in a positive way. I personally am very excited about what's coming for connected and automated vehicles. There are going to be things like crash notification, stolen vehicle recovery, emergency vehicle prioritization, and what I'm really looking forward to, since I've got about a 2-hour commute in the morning to work, I'm looking forward to autonomous driving. So I can't wait till the day I can get in my car, push the autopilot button, and just relax until I get to work. So, and I'm sure many of you share that sentiment if you have a long commute. And these are all technologies that AT&T is actively working on, and they're all based on 5G and IoT at the lowest level. So what we're primarily concerned about today are with public safety technologies and issues, specifically how FirstNet and public safety will work together and how they work just in general. As you can see, based on this slide, we envision, and this is very similar to what Bill just said, PSAPs is the heart of this emerging model. PSAPs will continue to answer 911 calls, but they will augment their capabilities to answer next generation 911 calls via SMS, via other IP messaging services, and via other future technologies. I mean, the sky's the limit here, really. So in conjunction with new public safety and smart cities operation centers, and Bill described this, there's going to be a centralized point that is going to grow, we think, from the PSAP, and there will be smart cities and public safety operation centers that will take this incoming information. They'll monitor IoT systems, and some of the applications that are already being delivered are gunshot detection, microphones everywhere listening for these kind of occurrences, environmental monitoring, water level monitoring, water quality monitoring, all kinds of things like that. Smart surveillance over wide, highly populated areas. The downside of this is that there probably won't be a place that you can go without a camera, capturing you in some way. But it's as long as it's used responsibly, it's going to be a very positive thing. Critical public infrastructure is going to be monitored by IoT systems. Things like transportation, electric utilities, gas utilities, and it'll be in conjunction, I'm sure, with smart grid technology to do billing and things like that. But strictly from a public safety point of view, we'll have detection systems to find out if anything's going to go wrong. Again, it's really going to be integrated into every part of our life. So this type of data will come into the PSAP or the operation centers, and it will feed those centers, who in turn will be the critical link between first responders or FirstNet responders and these operation centers. They will feed this information to the first responders and allow communication back and forth and communication sharing. FirstNet responders will be able to communicate among themselves and back to the operation centers via integrated voice traffic, and part of that will be on the 700 megahertz systems that are dedicated to public safety. Part of that will be on the commercial spectrum, if they need to preempt commercial spectrum to communicate in times of critical emergencies. We'll have information from body cameras, as Bill said, all kinds of things, medical sensors, even drone technology will be communicating to FirstNet responders back and forth. Data traffic is going to be communicated via laptop computers, other mobile devices, and I'm sure technologies that we probably have not even imagined yet. It'll be integrated into this system and part of it. So this is the technology side of things, and this is what AT&T is working on. We We have identified a number of things we would like to implement. We're working on them. All of these applications rely on underlying technology. And the underlying technology is, first of all, Internet of Things, Internet sensors and devices, and the network technology that is going to be critical in allowing this to grow is 5G technology, where there will be small cells and small antennas and all kinds of localized access points to the network that will feed this information into the centralized network. So much of the smart cities IoT and FirstNet development and convergence is going to be dictated by public policy and by legislation at the local and state level. So we, as a partner with public safety, we need public safety's and state and local legislators' help in allowing this technology to mature and grow to its greatest potential. So to ensure a well-coordinated and standardized implementation of this public safety infrastructure, local and state legislators should do a number of things. The first thing, I think, is priority one, is work to ensure that your states opt in to the FirstNet program. It's critical because when the states opt in, they will be part of a standardized national network that will have all the benefits of the technology and all the benefits of the federal funding that come with that. Support policies and legislation that will allow these technologies and applications to grow to their fullest potential. Reduce legislation to allow installation of small cells and cell towers, and to allow deployment of 5G, IoT, and FirstNet. And the small cells, I'm sure most of you know what that is, but it's simply a base station that acts like a small cell tower that will be deployed usually no higher than 10 to 15 meters, and will have a range of maybe 100 yards, something like that. So we're literally going to have small cell tower technology everywhere. We need to eliminate regulatory barriers that impede the development of next-gen IP networks that will enable high-performance IoT systems. Where there are industry best practices or voluntary frameworks already in place, agencies should respect them, support them, rather than moving first to a regulatory scheme. And thinking about, if best practices are going to be adequate to ensure proper installation. Any new legislation, and there will be some legislation that's required, but any new legislation should be applied with the lightest possible touch and be competitive, and this is very important, be competitively and technologically neutral to give all developers, carriers, everyone, a competitively neutral playing field. We need to make sure that any regulatory regime avoid duplication of effort, duplication of regulation by multiple overlapping agencies, especially, say, at the federal level. We have different areas of jurisdiction. So that's why we're asking that, regulation be kept to an absolute minimum in order to allow this technology to mature. We are trying to establish a national policy framework to support continued investment in this next generation network infrastructure. And that's, again, necessary to support IoT. Government essentially should let competition, technology, and customers drive this effort and drive the market. One of the things we've seen in the past and we'd like to avoid is avoid any steps that will artificially channel developments to a particular type of technology along a particular path or to a particular competitor. Basically asking regulators to look first before they decide to regulate.
Was any of this in your bid?
What's that?
Was any of this in your
Jerry,
bid? Yeah.
Because we're webcasting this, I'm going to ask people to come up to the microphone to give their questions so everyone can hear. So thanks.
All regulatory policy must protect cross-border data flows and avoid localized data retention requirements. One of the hurdles we're trying to cross today is interference along the borders, especially with band 14, 700 megahertz spectrum. There's a potential for interference over the Canadian border and the Mexican border. In Canada, we're pretty in pretty good shape. We've got, the FCC's got agreements with the Canadian government to mitigate interference and power levels and things like that nature. The Mexican border is a different situation, although we do have some agreements in place. 700 megahertz is still an open question. It's still not been resolved. There's a company in Mexico that is deploying 700 megahertz stuff, and we're asking that the Department of Commerce work with us to help resolve this Mexican border issue. There are going to be a lot of state and federal agencies such as immigration and customs enforcement, sheriff's offices, local enforcement. They're all going to be utilizing the 700 megahertz spectrum, and they're going to expect a robust coverage along the border for their applications. As with domestic regulatory policy, Department of Commerce should encourage international governments to promote development of standards and operating frameworks for IoT that are developed through industry-led voluntary practices and processes. And finally, supporting spectrum policies that promote allocation of additional spectrum in line with progress being made by standards organizations, industry standards bodies. We anticipate that quite a bit, if not most, eventually, 5G and IoT, especially in densely populated areas, is going to rely on spectrum in the gigahertz range. The FCC last year approved 3 different gigahertz bands. I believe it was 27 or 29, 37, and 39, I believe, gigahertz. And these are very short range types of spectrum, but they will be critical for small cell technology and deploying sensors really ubiquitously. So continuing the overall process of making more spectrum available for both licensed commercial broadband and unlicensed uses is essential to assure the deployment and availability of networks to which IoT solutions are going to be enabled. So it's, again, this is the most exciting thing I believe I have worked on in my career. It's the most exciting thing I've seen, and we're right, as Bill said, it's here. It's here. It's going to be deployed, and it's just going to get bigger, faster, and more useful for everyone. So that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Rich. And thank you both speakers. Good presentations. So we now have plenty of time for question and answers. I ask people who have questions to step up to the microphone. This session is being webcast, so I want to make sure that the people who are watching the session are able to hear the question and answers. And I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask the first question. And this is something that actually we've been thinking about very hard in NIPSTIC and our Public Safety Internet of Things working group. First responders like information, but they like to know that their information is reliable, accurate, timely, and secure. And so one of the questions that I have is, you can compile a lot of data from devices and through the Internet of Things, but how can you make our law enforcement and professionals and our firefighters and our emergency medical services professionals trust the information and ensure that it is reliable and secure? And I'd basically like to hear each of your thoughts on that particular question, because you can have all the data in the world, but if your police and firefighters don't believe that it's reliable, they're not going to use it. So, any thoughts?
Good question, Barry. And my short answer is that's why we need real-time analytics centers. We need places that take information from social media, for example, or 911 calls, and verify it against other sources or verify it against databases, maybe add information to it before it gets out to first responders, because I agree, we've got enough 911 calls. Some of you may be familiar with swatting, where somebody calls and says, I'm being held hostage inside my house, and the SWAT team responds, and it's really somebody just trying to get back at a neighbor or get back at a coworker. And that's why that sort of thing needs to be verified. And it could be verified, for example, in that case, with video cameras that might be nearby, for example. Or the 911 center could say to the homeowner, give me access to video cameras on your premise or in your house so we can see what's going on. But real-time analytics centers is my answer, Barry.
Thanks. Rich, any thoughts?
I guess it's okay. I would agree with what Bill said. We work very hard to develop best practices and standards. We've got a long track record of running 911 and E911 networks. Although we do see outages, they're outages for many different reasons. I was fairly pleased in the two recent hurricanes about how our 911 network performed in the areas that were actually taken out by the storm. The 911 network performed pretty much the way it was designed to do, to route 911 calls to alternate PSAPs. I think the smart city and public safety operation centers are going to be a critical part of having this data funneled into the PSAP or the center, and then using analytics to determine and verify what's happening. And of course, we have a very robust network in terms of protocol, and we have the circuitry is in many cases duplicated. We have backups. We have alternate routing schemes. So the network itself is fairly robust. It's going to be this new part of digesting this information, analyzing it, and possibly there's a lot of talk about AI, possibly using AI algorithms to evaluate the data and to make coherent sense out of it. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it develops, and of course, our priority is to make sure that the integrity of this data is the number one priority.
Thanks. Okay, let's open it up and we'll have some questions. Go right ahead.
Brenda Cooper, City of Kirkland, and while I've been an AT&T customer for a long time. Our city is primarily a Verizon customer. So what does this imply for me? Does this imply that if I want to get access to FirstNet for my police and fire, do I need to switch them to Verizon? You talked a lot about interoperability, but frankly, it looks like you're the winner, which is great because someone had to be. But do I then need to change those things? And how does that change the rest of my smart city planning? Because at the moment, we're almost completely Verizon because frankly, they have slightly better coverage. Slightly.
Well, to be part of FirstNet, certainly, you would have to the state has to opt into FirstNet, and AT&T will be the carrier there. However, there is Verizon has launched a pretty competitive product, and so I wouldn't say that you're going to be left out in the cold at all if you choose to opt out. There will be competitive offerings, but AT&T believes that because of our network technology, because of the standardization across the nation and standardization utilizing the dedicated 700 megahertz spectrum that's been allocated by Congress, that there's not going to be a better product out there. AT&T will have the finest product and the most standardized product. In terms of having to move away from Verizon in other aspects of communications, I think you would only be probably required for if you opted in and chose FirstNet to utilize that for public safety. That would not impact any kind of other governmental functions, I don't believe. If that's what you were asking, yeah.
I'll just contribute a couple things. One is, we talked about states opting in and opting out. All the governors opt in, opt out does is allow AT&T to build in a state. Like in Washington, AT&T has promised to add 39 cell sites to the state to improve coverage. There's no commitment of public funds from the state, and there's no requirement that City of Kirkland or any other city uses it. So you still have to make decisions on your own whether or not the AT&T product is the route to go instead of Verizon. However, without moving to AT&T, you won't get the priority, for example, of networks. And one thing I'm working on heavily is apps, the Internet of Things connections with apps and marrying up data. So hopefully there'll be some still interoperability.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, Amber Price, City of Auburn. On Tuesday's luncheon, we heard the keynote speaker basically state that the industry would not go out to rural areas because it doesn't pencil out. At yesterday's session, we heard the WIA rep state that, for rural services for public safety, that's FirstNet's responsibility, and it's all FirstNet. That's what FirstNet is for. So my question is, if in the future you can use an app to call 911, dial up 911, send 911 a message that you need assistance, and then it goes to FirstNet, how are people in rural communities supposed to do that if they don't have a broadband connection? Will FirstNet be providing that broadband connection to customers, to residents in rural areas?
So to answer the last part first, FirstNet will not provide services to consumers. The law that created FirstNet restricted FirstNet services to wireless and restricted them to first responders or public entities. However, AT&T definitely can still offer services to consumers, and does offer services to consumers, both wireless and wireline. One of the things that AT&T has promised in most states, including the state of Washington, is to add sites to improve rural coverage for wireless. And so that's the short answer to that. The other thing I would mention is that when you call 911, when you as a citizen call 911, you might call it from an AT&T wireless phone or Verizon or a landline phone, you're always routed to your local 911 center. FirstNet's not involved with that. It's only the 911 center dispatching to first responders where FirstNet and AT&T's FirstNet offering will carry the traffic.
And I could just add something to that really quickly. The fact that FirstNet and AT&T will be adding sites and expanding coverage to rural areas, the FirstNet service will definitely only be available to first responders. But the fact that those additional sites are going into rural areas, my hope is that will actually be used not only for first responders, but also for commercial services as well, because the spectrum is available to be used for secondary use. So even if FirstNet provides a site in a rural area that is primarily for public safety, it could actually increase the coverage for commercial users in that area because of the spectrum sharing and the ability to go across spectrum. So there could be benefits to commercial users in rural areas. At least that's my hope. Well, obviously, it hasn't been rolled out yet. We're eagerly waiting to see how it's going to impact and how it will expand in rural areas. But that's my hope, at least. Next question.
Thank you, Ken Fellman from Colorado. I'm going to ask you a few questions, but I'm wearing two hats here. So let me say, with my former NATOA president hat, thank you for being here. Barry said public safety isn't the priority of the communications work that NATOA does, but it's tremendously important, and it will continue. And obviously, FirstNet is a big piece of that. So we appreciate your being here and look forward to watching this process unfold and working with you as it does. Now, taking that hat off, full disclosure, I'm an attorney and I'm working with the state of Colorado. And I'm going to just throw three questions out at you. And if you don't want to answer all of them, you don't have to. But these are of concern, I know, to the folks that I work with and perhaps to others. One, yesterday, the FirstNet Executive Board met in Boulder, and the Vice Chair, Jeff Johnson, said, this is not an exact quote, but it's close, it's the state's responsibility to hold FirstNet and AT&T accountable to what they have committed. And as far as I know, the only legally accountable contractual relationship here is between FirstNet and AT&T. So I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that and kind of give us your, I mean, does AT&T agree with that, and how do the states hold FirstNet and AT&T accountable? I'll just throw them all out there, and if you need me to repeat them, I will. The second is, if you could elaborate a little bit on infrastructure hardening. How is AT&T going to determine what sites to harden and what will hardening consist of? And then lastly, I think this was in the original technical requirements for FirstNet, but do we all agree and commit that interfaces will be open to everyone and interoperable with users on all networks? So thank you.
Don't get too far away, because you might have to remind us. Where's that quote from Jeff Johnson? Jeff Johnson's the vice chair of the FirstNet Board of Directors.
Right. So this is admittedly not, I wasn't listening in, but the meeting was streamed, I guess, or open to the public or something. And I know that one of the folks that I work with in Colorado was at the meeting in Boulder yesterday, and Jeff said it's the responsibility of the states to hold AT&T and FirstNet accountable to what they've agreed to.
Well, with all due respect to Vice Chair Johnson, I don't think that's true. The contract is with the federal government, and it's up to FirstNet, who holds that contract, to hold AT&T accountable for what they've signed on to in the contract. And then it's also up, I would say it's up to local jurisdictions like Kirkland, City of Seattle, or not City of Seattle, but Seattle Police Department. They vote with their feet. If AT&T doesn't live up to the promises in terms of building sites and improving coverage and delivering apps and an app store and other things, they're not going to choose AT&T as a service provider. And therefore, AT&T will be failing in its contract obligations, which include public safety adoption. So I think it's up to the local jurisdictions voting with their feet and the federal government with FirstNet to actually hold AT&T accountable. And I don't know, Rich, if you
Well,
have
I can only say that, and Bill probably is much more familiar with the state agreements than I am, but I would say, first of all, they're going to be state-by-state contracts, and they probably will differ to some degree. So, we're going to be contractually obligated to do what we said we were going to do in the contract. I'm not sure how I can state that any plainer. We're contractually obligated.
Jeanette Kennedy from FirstNet Government Affairs that can elaborate, I think.
Sure. Let me provide some context for the question, but also kind of what you're hearing today. So, yes, it's true. The FirstNet contract is between FirstNet, the federal entity, and AT&T, the carrier, to develop and deploy 56 individual state and territory plans for how the infrastructure build will be deployed in every state. And so what has been presented to all the states are their radio access network plans. And we are working in consultation with all the states, including Colorado, including Washington, all of the states and territories, to develop, does this meet your public safety needs? And those public safety needs and the requirements that were in our contract were based off of a survey, data collection exercise that we conducted with the states about what their coverage is, what kind of applications they're used, where are the gaps, where do they feel the need for included coverage. So as we are discussing those state plans and we get feedback and there's consultation and there's dialogue and there's collaboration about how these plans are sufficient, it can be improved, can be looked at long term, all those inputs are then going to be included in what the governor will see. And that becomes part of the plan of record that feeds into the contract between FirstNet and AT&T. And Chief Johnson's comment about, everyone has to hold, FirstNet and AT&T accountable. Contractually, this still rests between FirstNet and AT&T. But as a state, as a future user, as a public, safety entity, it is part of your your responsibility, but also part of your, desire to help improve this network and have continual conversations about how we can improve the network. And, all that part is, as Bill says, that's going to, you have the ability to vote with your pocketbooks, vote with your feet. You can always approach us as, the federal agency or AT&T. You all have your local representative or your state representatives that you work with. All that input basically means, we're never not going to continue to receive input. But in terms of, what the state might want to do, I can only urge that within the state planning process that all those inputs are adequately documented into the state plan so that that can be part of the plan of record and it can be enforceable at that point.
The
Yeah, what are
other
the
comment
seconds?
I would make is earlier I quoted a specific number of sites for Washington State and I misspoke. That number of sites is not been determined yet. It's still in negotiation with the state because the state hasn't opted in. I'm sorry, Rich.
I was just going to ask you if you could repeat the second question.
Hardening, the issue of site hardening, and then the other one was, are all interfaces going to be open?
Okay, site hardening. I can tell you what our experience has been on that, based on all the way back to Katrina. The committee that investigated the aftermath of Katrina recommended additional hardening for sites, cell towers. There were a number of recommendations. The couple that seem pretty critical are backup generator power and backup battery power, making sure they're adequate, and some way to ensure that backhaul facilities don't go down. So cell towers go down for a number of reasons, or mobile technology goes down for a number of reasons. One of the things we've seen to a great degree is the power company in the state, if a storm comes through, loses power. We lose power not necessarily to the mobile facilities, but to backhaul. So we can't transmit data from the cell tower if that link is down. It's very easy also to assume that we can put in unlimited backup facilities in a cell tower, generator capability, and those kinds of things. But what that generally requires is underground diesel tanks, which involves zoning approval from local governments. And in some cases, they're either unable or not willing to give that authorization to install that kind of equipment. And secondly, we've also found, since we have a great deal of experience coming in after hurricanes, we found that staging equipment and repair crews outside the impact area of the storm is much more effective in terms of coming in after the storm, where things are devastated, bringing in equipment such as cells on wheels, antenna equipment, generator equipment, fuel. We stage that and are simply waiting for the storm to pass and then waiting for authorization from local government officials to come in, and we are some of the first people on site after a devastating storm. And we come in and we provide, if cell towers are down, we provide cell access through those cell on wheels and through power generation.
And I just have a couple quick comments. AT&T has promised to build 75 cell with satellite connectivity deployables, cell on light truck, specifically for public safety use, for like in wildfires or where coverage is needed. 75 specifically for public safety. Already has 500 that they deploy to hurricanes like Katrina. AT&T has promised priority access on 40,000 Wi-Fi points, which are wireline backhaul, and 6,000 distributed antenna systems in skyscrapers and stadiums and other places. So the public safety grade or hardening encompasses a lot more than just generators and batteries at sites. On the interfaces and interoperability, I'll give you a really just quick example. Think about a computer-aided dispatch system, body-worn video, and records management system. If the computer-aided dispatch software and records management software and body-worn video software all have open interfaces, then the CAD information, like the incident number and a lot of the dispatch information, could go automatically onto the video and automatically into a records management system. That interface will be open between the software. But if the body-worn video could have a capability to say, I'm a police officer, and let's suppose I'm a police officer. I'm in trouble. I need help immediately. The body-worn video might recognize that voice, talk to AT&T's network, immediately increase the priority for that officer, and also inform all the officers around. That interface, because it interfaces with AT&T networks, wouldn't necessarily be open. It wouldn't be open.
Yeah, I'd just like to make one comment about the level of dedication that AT&T is putting into this effort. Initially, the proposal was only to offer public safety communication via the 700 megahertz spectrum, the D block spectrum, if you will, that had been allocated by Congress. But AT&T has essentially opened our commercial network to public safety in the event of any kind of a natural disaster or other kind of disaster. First responders can, and the term is ruthlessly preempt the commercial network to get the bandwidth they need to communicate.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Ben Fabian. I'm with the City of Ellensburg. My question is, we own and operate a municipal fiber network, and we have vertical assets with our electric utility. How can we assist AT&T with this public-private partnership to support FirstNet? And who do we contact to inform you about the assets that we could potentially work together with and provide?
I guess I have a two-part answer. First of all, if you have any input or any input into any kind of legislative efforts, you would want to start there. You would want to make sure that any kind of legislation in your local area or state is appropriate for the kinds of technologies that we're wanting to implement. You said that you wanted to work directly with AT&T. Is that what you're saying? Or
We own and operate our own fiber
Okay,
network.
okay,
And
okay.
so as you densify or you need to get put up towers in the community, we can help with our fiber to connect those.
I guess they would
Or what
contact the
asset?
local state FirstNet
Yeah,
representative.
can I,
Yeah, sure.
given my work with the state of California on state planning and approving the state plan, that there has been discussion with AT&T and FirstNet about using local assets like what you have. But because FirstNet already has a network that's up and operational, and you're going to be leveraging that entire network initially on the build out, we have been looking at collecting information about local assets, making it available to the FirstNet. This is through the state point of contact, and letting them know that if there are coverage gaps or capacity issues with the existing network, then these assets are available to fill the gaps. And so it's less a situation where I think AT&T would be using those assets initially, but once the network gets up and running, if an agency identifies areas that the coverage is not great or where you need more capacity, then I think AT&T would be willing to look at leveraging the local assets to help fill in those gaps. So it's going to be kind of a collaborative process along the way, but we are working on the state level. We are working to identify those assets and make AT&T aware of them for future planning. So.
Okay. Thank you for that input. Just to provide some feedback in our community, pretty much almost none of our first responders use AT&T because of the coverage issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't want to approach it in that manner, but how do we provide that feedback that we're having problems?
Just personally, if your state opts in, when
Yep.
AT&T comes to sell you the service, you're going to say, well, we're really not interested because you don't have the coverage that we need. And then that might start the discussion of how AT&T can improve the coverage and perhaps utilize your asset. It's really going to be a situation where you're going to have to inform AT&T of
Okay.
what your needs are, and then allow them to respond, but at the same time making them aware that you have these assets available that could help. My sense is AT&T is very eager to serve as many first responders as possible, and they will be willing to work with you on those issues. That's just my guess so far.
All right. Thank you very
Okay?
much.
Thank you. We have probably one more question, and then we're going to have to wrap it.
It's a quick one, and
Okay.
it's a compliment. I am the chairman of the local cable board in my community in Oakland County, Michigan. I represent Birmingham, Beverly Hills, Bingham Farms, and Franklin. AT&T has a huge presence in my 4 communities, outstanding service, unbelievable coverage. It's so gratifying to be here and hear you come and speak. And, you know, it's not lost on any of us that we are right after 9/11. And I'm happy that it is working well, and I am going to make sure and connect with those and join that committee so I can share this with my 4 very different communities that need totally different services in an emergency. Thank you.
Thanks.
Can I squeeze one in there?
Real quickly, we're out of time, but if you can, of course, Jerry, I know has
Hi, I'm
no,
Jerry Letter.
no easy questions, but go ahead.
Well, no, I wanted to follow up with the young man's question earlier. We were told, and the law creating FirstNet says that it's supposed to use existing assets to the extent possible, to the greatest extent possible. All of us were involved in projects across the country cataloging not only hard assets, but soft assets like training capabilities, et cetera. And I think I just heard you say that all that only comes in if there's lacking capacity. And I think the other thing that we all thought, and I apologize if I'm getting long, I think the other thing that most local governments thought is that by cataloging those assets, making them available, that was somehow going to be available for an offset on the cost of this. Because we haven't talked about any of this. I mean, Bill gave us a wonderful world, but nobody talked about prices and how we're doing this in a day and age when we're laying off police officers and teachers, and we're going to now buy a second system. So that's sort of a disappointment. It looks like that offset of expenses is not on the table anymore.
It's on the table, like Barry said, to the extent that when AT&T, the local jurisdiction can have a direct conversation with AT&T about coverage in their area and how it might be improved. The other, in terms of pricing, that same conversation should occur with pricing of the local AT&T representative. There is pricing on a site called firstnet.com, I believe but it's nationwide pricing, and the local pricing can vary based on a number of factors. But it's got to be a conversation just like today with the AT&T representative, sales executive.
I should have prefaced this by saying thank you, by the way. We're all excited, but I think we're looking to.
There's still a lot of unanswered questions. Absolutely
Exactly.
right.
Exactly.
And maybe this time next year we'll do another panel session and we'll have all the answers. I want to thank you all for staying with us past the end time, and our panelists will be around for a little while. If you have additional questions, feel free to come up and ask. And again, thank you.